It's our great pleasure of being part of the global garden of Arts Electronica this year. And it's my pleasure to introduce you Oles Bachmaha, the amateur filmmaker, artist, creator, inventor, and very unusual person. Oles Bachmaha is 76 years old and he lives in the city Vinnytsia near Lviv in western Ukraine. He spent all his life in the synergy of art, technology and nature, and he's very interested because of doing everything and every tools that he is using is most of every tools that he's using in his life by his own. When he came from the army when he was young, he wanted to shoot the films, so he created the 8mm camera by his own. Not the easiest way, because easier is to go and buy one. Then he created the few models of the film projectors. He made several bicycles, he built all his home and all the stuff at home, all the furniture, windows, kitchen, living room and everything by his own. But he's also very interested by his films. And one of his very first films called Timbres of Summer, Barvelita, which tells the story of the nature at his garden, all the creatures, all the plants and all the life of his garden he's showing in this film that was shot on 8mm camera, and it made technically perfectly and on a very high level. This year we, as Urban Media Archive of the Center for Urban History, digitized his film, and the musician and artist Regina Zheleznyakova created very recently the soundtrack for this film. So I'm inviting you to the Oles Bachmaha garden to see his story and to watch his film.
Літо, то ще була тоді така природа більше, кажуть, без тих слимаків, першу чергу. Тато ще був там, город доглядав, то я доглядаю город, але просто я не знаю, з чим то пов'язане. Ну, наприклад, 3 роки тому вже в мене там того року я взагалі нічого в підвал не поклав. Нічого не вродило, нічого не зійшло. Абсолютно. Не знаю, в чому причина. Наприклад, в тому році біб я завжди саджу, біб тільки на одній рослині там заледве 1-2 стручки. Також не знаю причини. Не знаю, як то, в принципі, вважати. Ну, якась зміна є. І не тільки в людей. Бо, в принципі, от того року огірки ні в кого не посходили зразу. Люди пересівали по 2-3 рази. І причина невідома. Чому? Та я, в принципі, як кажуть, закінчив ЦПШ, церковно-приходську школу всього-навсього, розумієте? От як то так жартують тепер. От. Але в мене з дитинства було, як кажуть, таке вже стремління щось майструвати. Може трошки від тата, тато також трошки вмів дещо руками робити там. Напевно, передалося. Мій дід по татовій лінії, так розказують, я його не запам'ятав, бо він помер дуже молодий. Сам зробив, з Миколаєва родом туди на Стрий їхати, зробив в той час ще дерев'яний ровер собі. Так що таке, видно, щось трошки є по тому. Я, наприклад, в 5 класі вже сам зробив човен, і тут такий ставок, я і плавав тут на ставку. Ну і пішло-поїхало. Фактично активним таким членом, туристичний, краєзнавчий. Тут був художній, то було в будинку піонерів тоді ще в ті часи. Потім ходив ще, сам зробив сопілку, грав на сопілці в піонер-палаці ще, а потім в клубі тютюнової фабрики в оркестрі народний інструмент на сопілці. Потім там вже я як пішов, бо я працював після школи, працював в Національному музеї. Тоді музей на Драгоманова був, тільки він ще не був там в центрі. Там було всього-навсього колектив, щось 30 чоловік такий. Ну, то мене Борис Григорович Возницький, знаєте, такий, він мене туди. Він фактично в моєму житті зіграв дуже велику роль. От, він мене туди направив, я там 2 роки дурака валяв фактично. Ну, щось навчився там перед армією. А після армії я вже пішов працювати по радіо. Регулювальником радіоапаратури був в Львові на ремонті. От, зробив сам приймач радіо, зробив сам телевізор, зробив сам магнітофон в той час. На останнє моє досягнення таке технічне, то той проєктор.
Можна?
Показати його? Що його показувати? То моя повністю розробка і виконання.
Фона?
То все зроблено повністю. Від проєкту дизайнерського до виконання, абсолютно все саморобне. Тут знімається гучномовець.
Це колонка.
Колонка, можна під'єднати її. Тут от, я можу ту кришку ще зняти, якщо хочеш. То магнітофон, то якби супровід йде на магнітофоні. Та вже трохи років, фактично ще відео не було тоді, таке розповсюдження. Найскладніша деталь, яку я там зробив, то є трьохзаходний черв'як. Є така шестерня черв'ячна. Є такі шестерні, що мають просто зуби, а є такі шестерні, що черв'як є. Як черв'як крутиться, він приводить ту зубату шестерню. Ну, то у нас має велику редукцію, сповільнення ходу велике від того. Ну, то от мені треба було робити спеціальну вправку, таку, щоб зробити таку шестерню. То от зробив я її. То найскладніше з того, що мені довелося робити. Бо в мене там є станочок, там пристосування всякі, то все є в мене. То друга модель, більш досконала, так якби, з точки зору дизайну.
Це Орес Бачмага Орба.
Орба, так. Ну то все вчорашній день вже фактично, але мені було цікаво то робити. Значить, можна сказати, що все було до 90-х років. Він мав бути в перспективі навіть звуковий з тою магнітною доріжкою.
Зроблено у Винниках, це бренд.
В Винниках зроблено. Я все додому робив в основному. Тут таких нема тих, що я десь... Наприклад, то зроблений корпус, той зроблений з склопластику. Знаєте, що таке склопластик? Ні? Ну, то є такий фольгований текстоліт, покритий тонким шаром меді, і з нього травлять плати ті всі в телевізорах, магнітофонах, в всій техніці то були такі ті. Той матеріал. Значить, я їх спаяв по контуру там, за рахунок тої меді, що там є. І вийшов, ну потім пофарбував.
А ручки, кнопки, це ж...
Прошу?
Ручки, кнопки, їх же ж...
То все саморобне.
Самороб, кожна ручка.
Ні, ну то це я сам робив.
А, ти...
Ну єдине, що я використовував, так якби тоді була можливість, в політехнічному у Львові, там на Ватутіна, там гальванічний цех був. І, наприклад, деякі деталі, які треба було почорнити, тобто захисне зробити покриття, то я там давав їм, вони чорнили їх. Ну, спеціальний то я не робив сам, а виготовив там то все, то я сам робив. Я зробив виставку там того року, по-моєму, в березні в бібліотеці у Винниках.
Винник.
Так. Ну, то, в принципі, та виставка, я знаю, захотілося. Що вона охоплювала? Фотографії, картини, тому що я вмію трохи малювати. Ну, от, наприклад, та бандура там була. Якщо ви подивитесь, то я також зробив сам її. Ну і той проєктор. Пару оповідань має надрукованих, вірші.
А про ваш будинок, може, розкажіть?
Прошу?
Про ваш будинок.
А що будинок?
Ну, як ви його збудували?
Ну, та будував.
Все самі зробили.
Від проєкту до завершення, включно з меблями, то все саморобне. Єдиний майстер, який був, то врізка газової труби на вулиці. А то все, як кажуть, я зробив сам. Ну, тато був там, допустимо, на підхваті, підсобник був.
І вікна все самі робите?
Вікна, двері, все абсолютно все. Все, що ви тут бачите, то все я сам, ну, крім тої тумбочки. А я принципово не хотів центральне опалення, я так, трошки, якби, кажуть, привик при печі і зробив пічку. В першу чергу, що мені зараз вигідно, тому що я повністю газом не користуюся, я газ відключив повністю. я перекрив газ, заготовляю дрова. В основному заготовляю не те, що я купую, а так, от, допустим, на городі росте. У мене, наприклад, от 40 тик фасолі. Так всі тички на квасолі, все зі свого городу.
Достатньо.
Також я сам зробив ту пічку. Таку форму зробив, відлив таку з того. Ну, бив цеглу, шамотку таку крупну, відформував бетоном. Набитий, надавив молотком, прес мав такий шамот, глину, ту цеглу, тверду польську цеглу таку і цемент, все. Ще знімав на кіноплівку на 8-мм. Мені тут цікавіше було. Ну, там фактично так якби більше треба приділяти такої, як кажуть, якоїсь творчості, що там, не знаю, як сказати. Ну, мені було цікавіше. Я на ровері вантажив там штатив, апарат і їхав собі. Ну, ті фільми. Ви не бачили?
Бачив.
Але то так, не так просто зняти такий фільм. Бо то вихідний тільки можна використати, фактично. І ще якийсь там час такий, і ще щоб погода була.
У вас добрі кольори, взагалі якась топлівка?
Ну, кольори то заслуга фактично є то німців, бо то Софота. А там Свема також деколи випускала непогані плівки такі з тим, як вона називається, з кольором. Класний був. О, наприклад, та історія, якої могло не бути, то це фактично Свема, а там кольори прекрасні. Та й навіть барви літа там нормальні кольори, такі терпимі.
Посвідчені, так?
Ну.
І
Просто, що там-
макрозйомки.
Прошу.
Макрозйомки, звук записували.
Ну, та звук то окремо. Звук.
Але писали в лісі, птахів, ще ж.
А птахів я писав просто на магнітофоні.
Ну. Що
Такий
весь процес був.
Ходив в ліс і, як кажуть, ставив, шукав там. То не так просто все. Знайти гніздо, то не так просто. Ну то, в принципі, в мене мусила бути десь майстерня. У мене там в коморі була майстерня така, ну там маленька кімнатка, там така не було. А тут, ну, поки хата ще не була збудована, то я тут на приміщенні ванни там станок стояв. Потім там на горі, ну факт той, що так, аж поки там вже з'явилися так, то я там зробив собі. Може хочете ще вишняку?
Ой, та є.
А? Ви не підете?
Піду, а ви йдіть, я за вами.
Добре. Не заблудитеся?
Руби зварили.
Так.
Бачите, теж півкруг зробили.
Тому що не закінчив, в ту кімнату на перспективу. Ну там. Ту картину я малював.
Ого.
Ну то так якби під голландський натюрморт.
Але
Купити, значить, треба для того заробити гроші. Треба якусь роботу робити таку, яка мені не цікава, допустимо.
ага, тобто вам...
А то мені я зразу і себе реалізую, і економлю гроші до певної міри, що я не купую.
Це справжня майстерня.
Так, то я зробив той верстат столярний. Я ще тоді про хату не думав, але там, допустимо, щось майструвати хотів, то я от його зробив. То перший мій виріб такий після армії.
Я думав, що це такі готові купували.
Ні, то я все сам. Я все сам стараюся сам все зробити. По можливості. То мої, як кажуть, станки по металу. То я також фактично сам зробив, намалював креслення. Звичайно, що ті деталі мені зробили на заводі, а вже зібрав там дещо я вже доробив сам. Ну то заводський, просто тут поставлений той шпіндель. То такі по металу станки. У мене там є до нього всякі такі, як тепер модно казати, прибамбаси, от, наприклад, планшайба є там, для того, щоб використовувати. Ялинна головка є там. Ну, є все таке, що необхідне, щоб виготовити фактично якусь деталь таку складнішу. Ну, в веломобілі то я робив не одну модель веломобілі. І, значить, я його зробив, то все, воно було в мене зібране, в коморі лежало фактично 2 роки. А от приїхав тоді от Саша Буйвіт, ви його знаєте, чи ні?
Так.
Ну, Олесь знає його. І я йому показав той веломобіль, і він каже, та ви що, то давайте, каже, поїдемо. І він, значить, на своєму бусику приїхав, ми завантажили його туди, виїхали на Миколаївську трасу.
Ага.
Олена
тепер новий
їхала,
асфальт.
мала, значить, мама їхня, значить, поїхали туди, повозилися там на ньому, всі признали, балдеж, значить, такий. До Трьох Дубів поїхали там. Та ви закінчите в будь-якому разі, навіть малий Еммануїл, то вже міг на ньому їхати, значить, там сидів. Ну я вирішив його закінчити, пофарбувати, там, зібрати, все як має бути. То я зараз тим якраз займаюся. Значить, то є каркас веломобіля. Він має 3 колеса, сидіння м'яке, підвісене на пружинах. Ну вигідний, я признав сам. Я використав ідею з того, з інтернету, там тих конструкцій на заході повно є різних.
На замовлення не робите, то ви так для себе.
На замовлення я не роблю, тому що був такий момент, наприклад, дехто хотів, там в мене стоїть той ровер, на якому я їжджу. Ну, там,
Ви ще не бачили зараз.
ну, то хоч дехто хотів, а жінка каже, ні, я не хочу, щоб ще хтось їздив на такому. Вона також такий подібний має.
А сама ваша камера є?
Яка камера? Чому я її не завершив? Тому що пішов стандарт Супер 8, а я робив ще її на нормальну плівку,
Навіщо?
на 8. І вона була так би вже не актуальна.
Ви не встигли за
Я
зміною
просто,
технологій.
так, я відстав фактично. Так само, як можна сказати, я відстав і від проектора, бо то вже там підпирало відео. А по-своєму, звичайно, вона була цікава. Вона, в принципі, повністю вже зроблена, тільки то, що не завершена.
Така зовсім мініатюрна.
То зроблено, як кажуть, є суцільного куска вифрезерування металу. Вона мала мати оптичний візор, експонометр. Люблю такі речі мініатюрні, то я робив її таку. Ну, в першу чергу я конкретно переслідував одну мету. Мені було цікаво, все.
Hello, welcome to the Center for Urban History. And let me introduce myself and then my colleagues. My name is Bohdan. I work at the center as a public history project manager. And then our head of the Urban Media Archive, Oles, and Sofia, she is director of the Center for Urban History. So we are going to discuss a bit what you've just seen in this short film. And I will be a facilitator of this discussion. And my first question goes to Oles. So Oles, please tell us a bit more about this amateur. Who is this person and what he is still doing?
Hello, dear audience. Oles Bachmaha. So we are going to talk about his film and also by himself about him because he's very interesting figure and creator. It's a very complex person. It's even hard to describe him as an amateur or creator or artist because he was by his work he was always trying to avoid somehow the system, but not politically, but more technologically. He was trying to do everything by his own, and he is very interesting as a film amateur because he was very enthusiastic and shot in film about mostly about the nature in his small town Venniki. It's like the now it's part of Lviv, so and this film it's his first film. It's documentation of the nature in his garden near his house that he built, and as he told, the inspiration to shoot the films comes to him when he first saw the Hungarian film about the nature from the 50s, and then he read the book how that film was shot. So when he came from the army, he had the idea to shoot the films about the nature, and also so he constructed the camera. Then he bought the camera because like the format changes from 8mm to Super 8, and he was shooting perfectly as for that time and as for this quality of materials, quality of films. The development of film, the colors, everything was very on a high level, and then he was also living not in the city, but he was the part of the city because he was working at the art gallery in Lviv as a photographer, and then later he was working constructing the exhibitions at the art gallery. So but he, as he told, he had the 2 working days at the gallery, and then he took the materials to go back to Venniki and work with them to develop the photographs, reproductions, and so on. So as he told, he had a lot of free time for his creativity. So and when we are talking about him as a film amateur, like the amateur movement and what is amateur, we can understand in different ways. It's hard. From the one hand, it's part of the practice in that times, which was very widespread. But from the other hand, it is also the genre. So, and for me, maybe it's better understand him like the amateur by genre, and it's doesn't mean that it's like some lower quality of the film, but it means that this film is more independent from the, I don't know, from maybe technological and also economical system, because the film production costs a lot of money, and amateur film is like lower by budget and more independent, but not it doesn't mean that it's lower by quality and by idea.
Okay, thank you, Oles. Indeed, these media amateurs was the widespread phenomenon all over the globe, and I remember the Lithuanian-American artist Jonas Mekas doing his kind of amateur films in New York, and one of his products was called The Birth of Nation, where he referred to this amateurism as a kind of the birth of a new nation of new creative force, let's say. So he would identify people with cameras as a kind of new sort of people. And here my questions to Sofia. So in Soviet Union, they actually aimed, to my humble knowledge, the whole idea of socialism is to make a new human. And in Soviet Union, we also had like millions of these people. Can you reflect a bit on this amateurism or this new human on the socialism?
No, I think that it would be really too bold to say that only Soviet Union put an aim to create a new person. That actually something like reinventing human is a part of many ideologies, you'd say. But it's true that Soviet Union as a state really went to the edges of what is possible instrument that you can employ to create a new person. So, and then terror included, first of all. But that's, we are in the specific moment of, so Soviet Union is about 70 years of history. And with Oles Bachmaha, we are entering Soviet Union in a specific setting. And it's a setting of, which we call late Soviet. This is also a moment then this project is withdrawing from using violence as such. We do know that after 50s, terror becomes less bloody and less massive. So the question, so what are and this was actually one of the primary tools of creating new man or new woman.
Violence was
violence,
yes.
Exactly, violence. So what are the tools? So what are the ways? Because it's not only about human person, it's also about community. So it's about not an individual, in a way individualistic. So, and we do have this tomato and tomato story that, we are talking about individual, but Soviet rendering of individual is not individualistic. And here one of the and this system that is in place is something that allows people like Oles to create and exist, even if, as Oles said, that you can see that how he talks about himself and also how we might talk about him as a person outside of the system, avoiding the system, but actually it actually helps to think that the system allowed him to be. And also how he, looking at him, is helpful to look not only at him, but through him, and get glimpse into not what was the 70s, what was the 80s, but also what are the topics that are there, and some of them are still bothering us today and probably will remain. So this is the question, of who has, what is creativity and who has the right to exercise creativity? Do you have resources and time to doing that? And late Soviet Union was pretty much investing into this participation and more horizontal network, which would not undermine Soviet Union as a state, clearly, with the capital in Moscow, but created this number of, we would say, networks, institutions, and many of them were about culture. So in one of them, and actually Oles was not Bachmaha, he is like a fellow traveler through a number of them. You hear that he was singing there, painting here, going to this. So he being from his childhood, going to the House of Culture, in Vinnytsia, or because he's originally from there. Another question is actually how you this autonomy issue, because, the story that we see, it's like that he is secluded. He's cut, from all the links. He has his universe, kind of built his universe at his home. And this is very striking because it's like super traditional, home and this limited location, like it's actually how most of the time humanity lived. We as a people lived, we were producing, communicating, creating in a small radar, of people were moving clearly, but still it was something that technology and modernity changed. And then he takes this technology that allowed us communicate, travel, be on our own, to actually combine this, to use this technology as a tool to almost like recreate traditional setting where he is not an amateur, but actually he's a master of all things. He's a master in his home, in his whatever. Universe. I mean, he is. But it's also something that, and the last point I would like to maybe make here is also about this autonomy and bringing us to the specific context of the late Soviet Union. And we know that the plan system was full of deficits. So people queuing, people lacking or waiting for the goods for years or not being able to get them. And, he is reacting in a way we can see him as a reaction or in this setting of deficit. So he is doing all the things from elements, and he is like defying deficit of the system. So you can't get a camera, you build yourself a camera. You can't get a window, you do yourself a window. So do yourself thing. And actually this do yourself thing is pretty widespread at that time, which we actually can take as an argument against plant and the shortages of plant system, which would lead up to another conversation. But I think for today, we could also think, what does it mean deficit? Because we're also living in a time when we're more and more aware that our resources are short, that we're running short of water, that we're running short of many things. And is creativity and certain, autonomy or self-sufficiency or whatever we frame can be a reaction or a way about, at least making us aware and maybe doing something on that our resources, even if we are not in planned economy anymore, are actually short.
And maybe to add on this, you can to the culture, this infrastructure is very interesting because at some point he go to the cinema in Venneke and watch this film. Hungarian film in Venneke, which is now in Venneke. There is no cinema in Venneke at all. Also this House of Cultures, and also very important figure Boris Woznicki. For those from our audience, Boris Woznicki is very important person in the local museology in Lviv. So at that time, the young Boris Woznicki was working there as a teacher in the art school. So, and he was teaching him, and Oles Bachmaga tell how they were traveling around, watching the nature, painting, and so on. So it's also important that it is part of this infrastructure. And then after army, Boris Woznicki takes him to the National Art Gallery to work. Another thing is, we can think about him out of system because we know other his films, which are the amateur comedy films, where he's involving another people, and it's comedy, so it's created for some audience and to watch it with audience. And then we know he took part with his film in some competitions, also in the film amateur club later when he met Roman Puchko. And also about the deficit, I don't have the answer to this question, but I think it's interesting to think about the economical value of the time at that moment, and the value of technology, and the value, for instance, for camera, for some instrument, because Oles Bachmaga is working with that technology and medium that he can overcome. He can master this technology, and he can work with this, because later when the video came and started widespread, so he's finishing shooting his film, because and also as this he pointed when this format of 8mm and Super 8mm changed, he left this camera undone. So it's very interesting, and also like this value of the time and free time and the value of the technology at that moment.
Yeah, it's interesting. We do a lot talk about interesting thing, and I like his self definition of the creativity. He wouldn't say I am the author or I am the creator. He would say it was interesting for me. That's it. That was enough for him to spend like hours and hours and days.
Curiosity. I mean, curiosity.
Yeah, the curiosity.
He's a curious.
And this curiosity is also part of the, let's say, the part of the culture that the system tried to kind of develop during the late socialism. And I know that in Japan they have this format of defining craftsmen, like who do like clay pottery or some blown glass or something else in a very traditional way. They claim these people like heritage sites. So not the products themselves, but the people. And my strange question goes to Sofia. Can we think about this person as a monument, as a heritage from the past?
I mean, I hope not a monument, because we tend to build and destroy monuments, and that's actually something you would not wish for a person to be destroyed and renamed. And but I think that he is as a heritage, but not as a heritage as something to protect and think it's something immobile. I mean, I think it might be rather helpful to think through Oles about how to challenge the concept of heritage, like reverse this rather. But I mean, he is his story. I mean, his life story is something that creates a possibility of communicating with the past. And I think that we do really have a problem with establishing multiple ways of engaging with our very recent, or more or less within living memory past, which is the Soviet history, and actually also post-Soviet. It's not only Soviet, because his life is not broken into the Soviet and post-Soviet. His life continues. And there are his 80s and his 90s, and then we historians are coming and doing this categories here, cut the life. So I think that his story definitely it helps to visit the way we cut history, the way we dehumanize it. I think it does really maybe actually rethink what the monument is, the way that something about process, something about, I think that also the story of how he relates to his very close environment, because you also see on one hand a house full of objects, but through his interview it's also a house full of relation with people. I mean, he seems like does not want to do, he lives alone, but he is communicating a lot. I mean, they go to this with the free-wheel bike there. I mean, there are neighbors. So it's like very, the power of local is there very much, and I think that's something that we might appreciate.
The title of his video, projector made in this
city
village, whatever.
Who am I? And on one hand, he's like, and I really, it just struck me that how he has this competitive mode in him, because he's curious and he likes to take risk and he wants to do something that nobody else done.
Challenge.
He has this challenge, but he also has this humbleness. Because it's okay, this came at this Super 8 and kind of, I was obsolete, and then I moved on. So something that, because there are this fierceful competition, that's something that drives you to the edge and then can destroy one's personality, and, sometimes personality is round. And here he has this combination of his way about being curious and competitive, which is not killing. And I think this is really something that I would not put him I would not freeze him into monument, and I would not freeze him into heritage in the way we see monument and heritage. But if you will rethink the monument and heritage, I think it can be helpful for us to do that.
Sure, and he's all the time he's trying to be modern, as you mentioned. Like there is no nostalgia for some technology for films, so it's okay for him like just to left this camera and done and go to switch to another format. And now he's also using like the digital camera. He's trying like to reconstruct the old lenses to work with it, to work with digital cameras and so on. So he's very modern, and he's all the time thinking about the technology. And he's like he said, it was obsolete. And
I think that it's very. I mean, it's. One would not like to use people as instruments, just to begin with, like to disclaim. But I think he really can be a good partner to ask number of questions. Actually, why we need also past, to have the past as a laboratory, not of finding out what the truth is, but actually asking questions and figuring out where we are and who we are here. So I think that his story might be really helpful for as a critical exercise of the society we are living locally, and actually can expand it pretty much to big topics, which, I mean, locality does not mean that here are small questions only. So I think that, if you look at his life, he was able to get what Oles said with free time. This was a different setting of free time and a concept, not only of the amount of free time, but also the concept of free time is really much more powerful. And it was not from the very beginning of the Soviet Union. I mean, that came like in the 60s, as we know, an extra date. And generally a good thing to have free time, but also good to have good time in free time, And then he could combine this official job. He could build his house. I think it's also like telling his story. It's important probably to put both parts or many parts into his image. But we also now see that such life is, I would not call him marginal at that time. I mean, he was not a marginal, there was this whole network of groups and people. And right now he is marginal. And I would actually say that this is actually not his problem. This is our problem. that he is at the edge of social, in a way. He's not at the edge. I mean, but it's in our perception, and it's a question. What is the mainstream and what is the margin, and is there a problem? And I think that his story can be very helpful for asking these questions.
Yeah, I'd like to talk a bit more about this archiving such things. So as you said, the holistic story of this person shows us the complicated matters of history, and then we can look back or tackle history through such biographies. But then when it comes to products, so we have like his films, which we put in the archive, and we give metadata, which are kind of very sober, minimalistic things that we add to these products. So, Oles, do you think it's ever possible for historians to kind of archive such a complicated matter as this amateur and his products?
So when we are archiving his film, but we also want to record his story, and then use this film to tell the story and talk about this story. And talking about his film, they are original and they are unique. They exist only in one copy, because that's the question of this format of this film. And if you didn't archive it, a lot of such film probably disappeared from other art, so you will never know about this culture. So these films, they are open as the new topics for historians and for researchers to work with this context and with this material. So, and when we archiving this film, we are trying also, that's very important part, we are trying like to show this film as we do today, and to talk about this topic, and trying to record like his story and interview with him like now to know all this information about him.
So you archive and unarchive at the same time.
Yeah.
And then my question goes to Sofia. For the center that you run, the important issue is this dichotomy between central and local, the marginal and important, non-important. So obviously for many people who work for the national archives or national institutions, such products are let's say of less importance. Yeah, so they take it with kind of some reservation whether this need to be preserved, archived, and so on. So can you elaborate a bit on this? Why it is important actually to look for these marginal stories?
I think that that we do. I mean, one of the legacies that we have of 20th century and these powerful states, and the state is that there is a hierarchy of archives, and something has to really to be important, has to get to the top. I mean, national is much better than regional. I mean, it must be then really important. And I think that that we need to, and this is what we are trying to, not only rethink what is important and not important to collect, preserve, work with, because it's a part of our human curiosity and existence. We know something and we want to know something else, and then move and then explore something that somebody was not before, because it's really quite a joy to visit Oles Bachmaha in Vindniki and make a film about him for the first time. I mean, that's, so our agenda is not really to make like the archive or national archive or to collect such thing. I mean, which actually they probably will, and it's not out of imaginable, but also say that this power over archives should be pluralized. That's actually something that we do not have to have the super storage with the super authority, because kind of we had that. But also say that, and it's also not a one-directional way. In one direction, as Oles said, that we have to take out and store and keep it, but it's rather it's a constant and ongoing transformation. So, and a conversation and a communication. This words. And so in our center, in our program and a project, Urban Media Archive and Public History, it's rather to, it's about like shifting these boundaries of what should we archive, what happens when we decide something has to be preserved, what preservation means, and I think that in this coming out of rather centralized system, and which centralization is definitely not the not something unique to Soviet experience. So we are here, I mean, here in this part of the world are not unique in this way. But thinking in terms of that, how as experiences are taking place, where archiving should have, but also how it should also transcend its boundaries and how to communicate different localities. And I think that this is something where I mean, this approach can be helpful to think. That's.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have a few more minutes. I think we can discuss these important and interesting issues of relations between technology and nature. Since Oles Bachmaha, we can define him as broadly as creator. He did a lot of different things, but then one of the specific focuses of his creativity was photography and video or film. In the beginning, film, and then later video. And I want to ask Oles, can we actually rely on these archives that we collect and the practices that we describe? that this shows us a bit new perspective on nature, or do we learn actually about nature through the lenses of these people? Do you think it's actually possible?
It's rather we can talk about the reception of the nature by some people, because the observation and all these ecology topics and ideas of the nature is very important for him. And we also have some his poetry about the nature in his other films, where he shows, he has the film like the My Weekend, where he show his day and how he is living his weekend day. He goes to some fields, to some hills around Vyniki. He goes with his small dog and with a bicycle to the wood, and he's walking there. So he is showing his interaction with the nature, and it's probably very common for that time. Such romantic idea of connection of people and with nature. So we are talking probably from about the 80s, late 80s, and he's talking about this and his relation. This the one of the part of his ideology and one of the part of his like attempt to the world to talk about the nature. He's not he's living like when he have some small creatures in his home. So he's trying to co-live with them, but not put them out in the winter or something. So
he tries to harmonize his life with
there's the kind of some synergy with nature, but also with technology.
Yeah. Then the question is to Sofia. Can we again think about him as an autonomous person who has this specific attitude towards nature and environment, or this is also part of the bigger, like a social or political or ideological frame? We know that Soviet Union as an empire had a very kind of expansive view on nature. So nature had to be conquered, and then they turned out rivers, they destroyed seas, they did a lot of bad things. But then on the other side we have this local level of the person who lives kind of and makes his own small harmony with his environment. Do you think this is paradoxical, or this was normal for this time?
I think that we clearly see much more and probably understandably talk much more about what Soviet system as a modern state could do to nature. I mean, it's not unique story, and we do. I mean, however, extend and the capacity to mobilize resources and do projects in the Soviet Union had specifications. But we also see that there is also towards the end of its existence in society, but also not only society, I mean, in different milieus, there was a criticism to that. And there was also this movement which probably would be in the 80s, became much more political, and we know the reaction to the nuclear catastrophe in Chernobyl, but also and how it all ecology became a very powerful message, which allowed to mobilize so many people, and also is hitting all the problems that the state could not and the system could not deal with. But we also don't see that much. It's much less obvious and story of how socialism and Soviet Union also was trying to go. People were trying to go local to figure out how to live with the surrounding, how to create areas, and that's a big word was for imagining possibilities for Soviet society and Soviet person in that society for communication, общение, talking, having this, then, talking and conversation, communication takes place in certain environment, and this environment became much more an understanding that it has to be developed in different ways or different treatment of nature. Because the nature has been really severely mismanaged. That's so this much less known story, which is kind of because the finale was such a disaster, is I think should not be rather treated like to redeem Soviet system or Soviet state, but rather again having a conversation through the past for the present, because we also do, however, this centrally planned and rather heavy state system is not here anymore. But the questions with how we treat nature, how our relation, what we do, how we utilize responsibility, they are not gone. So kind of Soviet Union is gone. The problem, but we repeat, and we are not the only one here. We are not on the planet the only society that for whom it's really an urgent issue and question.
Yeah, it's very evident, especially when on the border with European Union, you could establish whatever border with Ukraine, but then the rivers flow back to Europe. From Ukraine.
We are connected.
And we are connected by nature. I remember.
And not only with Europe.
Yeah, not only with Europe. But I remember these discussions after the Chernobyl disaster, and the people from various countries were arguing who was damaged the most, like Swedes or Belarusians or whatever, or the Ukraine. So the cloud of nuclear pollutions, yes, they spread out globally, and you cannot separate
and in a way, sometimes, you think what can be like the reason. Sometimes you have this question, the idea behind society, a nation idea. You actually can say and think, taking care of the site where nuclear waste is dumped in Chernobyl, gives you a story to work on for I don't know how many thousand years forthcome.
Yeah.
You can basically, you have a project that you have to take care for thousands of years into the future. And you can organize the reasons for society to be busy, to live, and then it's a question, that maybe taking care of your surrounding and then thinking how surrounding can be really your garden in front of your window, but also your surrounding, is much more than even a planet. Helps to navigate scales and also scales of responsibility.
Yeah, I also like this metaphor of this amateur living with his garden in harmony. He doesn't have a sewage system, actually. He doesn't have a water supply in his house. He brings water from outside. He's kind of very careful with the surrounding in which he lives. And I think his example can be of very good or useful metaphor for others. We can finish. I like maybe to ask my colleagues, maybe they have some other further associations or maybe some conclusions, maybe to sum up or
we
to
can
wrap
ask
up.
something Bohdan. Because you've been there and
yeah, but maybe just like for the finish and talking about Oles and what you just said, like this close connection to the nature, it gives him like the possibility of this long time observation and feeling of his nature, and he is very interesting when he is reflecting on some ecological and changes in nature in his garden. And also, but thanks to this observation, I think he finds very interesting, and he finds his life balance with the nature, and thanks to this observation. So I'm wishing all of us to find this life balance that probably maybe nature can give us, and we can have this balance also with technology and with the nature.
Yeah. That's one of another characters of our stories, astronomer. He said that observation should be done in whatever settings, even if the war is running around, the observation should be done.
But you have like the scientific observation and then these private observations. Also, they are equal, probably.
Yeah, and probably they are not on the. They don't have to be on the same scale, and we don't have to have. But we do have this observation, academic and scientific is over there, and private is here. And
when we visited
That's
this
high.
this person in his house, I continuously had this feeling that he reminds me Leonardo da Vinci, the Florence guy who came from nowhere. I mean, he was a kind of bastard child, but then again, he was a child of the known lawyer. And this this person also is kind of, he's nobody, but then he was picked up by the known guy. And then he had the patrons, he had institutions, and he had the same as Leonardo, this big curiosity about nature and about humans and about surrounding. And I think this
But
behind this 500.
do we need Leonardo to justify Bach Maha? That's a question.
No, I'm not justifying. I have this
You have this association.
Yes,
Yes,
association.
association.
And then it brought me, of course, the personal feeling that something that he did is important because of this association. Of course, I'm not saying that this is correct way of thinking, but this is my thinking. So I associated him with these people of Renaissance who kind of supposedly could do all the things by themselves. So they are kind of universal humans, and this is what we usually like about Renaissance, that there was this belief that people could do a lot of things.
Man.
But then we reached Enlightenment, and everything was broke with this.
And it's as Deering, it's also a scary dream of new human.
So whenever you start dreaming about the new human, you can end
you
up.
have to watch out your garden.
You can end up with Stalin and other dreamers who then will destroy your garden. So watching up the garden, or as enlightened people also would say, gardening is a good metaphor for
but also a scary one, because you have to, and once you start gardening, you have to cut, and then that's. He's not doing gardening in the sense.
No, he said that he left everything.
Is there a garden without gardening?
I would say he has this hybrid practice. So he has these special, how we call them, like these slimakie, snails, but without snails without small houses. Those
without
shellless snails, and they eat all the.
And he's not curious about them.
And he says like, oh, this is a big disaster. They eat everything. So he uplifted his these flower beds, and then these beds for small potatoes or onions. So he's not just letting them eat, but he's not fighting them.
He's not killing them.
And he says, I'm destroying the food supply chain in my garden by uplifting my bed. How do you call them? Рядки. Whatever.
Just boxes for plants.
So we can end up our story, our broadcasting. Of course, if you have questions, you can ask them online through our YouTube channel, and we would gladly reply. And I think we are over. Or do you have some more?
I think we are not over the story of Oles Bach Maha. That's the beginning, or like initial phase.
Yeah, we're also about to have him here at the center in 2 weeks and to watch all his film. And maybe we would like to thank for the musicians that he made the music for his film, Regina Железнякова and Pavlo Olefirenko. And maybe let's be curious, because it's very nice when curiosity moves us.
Thank you for visiting YouTube channel of the Center for Urban History, and please come more. We are doing a lot of interesting things which develop curiosity. Bye bye.
Bye bye.